Okay, so I'm presuming that most of you are from the last session, and we're just continuing on the process. I just wanted to be able to separate these things because that's how we actually had this thing put into place. So, um, just as a summary of what we did with section one, which I know I summarized a moment ago, we're able to create courses, we're able to import courses, we're able to create assignments, we're able to import assignments, and we're able to add questions. So let's go into a little bit more detail associated because the last part I kind of crammed in there quite quickly. And I want to make sure that we have the ability for doing so. So I'm going back to my top level and have my course, and here's my assignment. I'm going to click my assignment, and I want to go into again adding questions here. So let's just talk about this a little bit more. I emphasized a few of these things in the last session that was there. Um, uh, ho- yes, Mohammed, you have a hand raised. Um, can you put it in the chat? Oh, can you not see my, oh, my video is not on. Although you don't see much, I cannot do that. Okay, thank you. Okay, so here we go. So we have an assignment. The assignment has a question into it because it came with the assignment because I imported it. But let's say that I don't like this thing. I can delete it right there. But before deleting it, I want to just go through the topics again. You have question number one, only question. Here's the title. Again, it's structured in a certain way that doesn't matter because students don't see the title. Here's the adapt ID number. So anytime you see this little blue double thing, that right there represents a copy. The only time we also use it a little bit in clone over here, but this right here. So this will copy this number here into the chat. And that's important because I may want to use that number somewhere else. So I just quickly do this. If I click it up here, it will actually give me all the numbers down below into a comma separated thing. This question is H5P. It's has 10 points. No explicit solutions are part of it. H5P has solutions baked into it. There's the edit bar. Many times that you won't have the edit button on there because you don't own it. So if you don't own it, you don't have editing rights connected to it. And this right here, if it's red, means that this question is not public. So it can't be cloned. So there was given no permission in order to be able to clone this question. So if I were to click on this, it doesn't do anything in contrast to other questions that are out there. And that's just the preference that they've done. In fact, I'm probably going to talk to them to find out how to make sure that they've actually put their questions as public so people can clone them. And I can trash that. And so there are three buttons here. These are the three big buttons that we use a lot on the assignments. These other ones are important too, but these are the ones that we really care a lot. The first one is to view the questions, and that's the question view mode, which is basically what I'm in right now. If I click on the question, I can then see it rendered. So here's this question here. So the reason this has one question and not 10 questions is that it's a composite H5P question, which means that each part here is a section of a question. So it's a question sub-question infrastructure. We discourage this sort of approach for doing things. We prefer to actually have them broken up because H5P doesn't have quite the level of control over each individual part that we would like to have for these things. So don't be surprised if you do these sort of things and they don't work 100% effectively. So I can add questions and I can make a new question. So I don't want to talk about new questions because that's a bit of effort depending upon which technology you want to do and such as that. But I do want to talk about adding questions. So if I add the questions, I can add questions in two ways. One is to, I'm going to click on this button right here. If I have the ID number of that question, I can write it down. I can paste into here and it will add it. So any of the three 120,000 questions. Each one has its own ID number. You can paste it in there and that works it. That's convenient when you're browsing and you're just parsing through in order to be able to do it. So let's take a look at this and show you how you do it. So I'm going to go into this chemistry course and go into this pre-lab and I'm going to copy this ID number. Now I can write 105 300, but I just copied that. And then I just come into here, I paste it with Control V, and now I've imported it. That's it. Now, of the ways that we add questions to assignment, this is the way I actually prefer. I like browsing through and saying, okay, I like this question. I like this, grab this question, add it. I like to, oh, browse, I see how this person, oh, I like this question, grab it. Or I can come in uh, and I can click this and it clicks all of them. And now I pasted all of them here and I could import the whole thing. So it's a convenient way in order to sort of import the questions for an assignment without bringing in the assignment. This has an error because I already brought in that number, I think. Be interesting to see what that number actually happens to be. Something with the question here. Okay. Well, anyways, let me paste that again. That's odd. Okay. Let's not ignore that. So here's all the terms or all the questions are here. This right here was a pooled question. So like I said, I have 24 questions and I only showed 3 of them to the students. Each student had a different set of questions meant for them to evaluate whether they read the lab report. Like in this case here, this is the case. Which one would you do in the same situation? Okay, so what I want you to do is to go through actually let me show you how to start this a little bit here. So in the upper right hand corner you have the dashboard. So I'm going to click on this thing and I want to do a search through search questions. But before that I want to emphasize the top 5 parts of the dashboard are the ones that are associated with me, my courses, my questions, my learning trees, my assignment templates, my rubrics. Those are mine and they could be shared or they could not be shared. That is, it could be public or private. Okay. These 5 down below are associated with the public, the community. So I can do a search through all questions, technically a search through all public questions. I can browse learning trees. I can look at all public courses. I can look at the courses that are in the commons, that specialized area public, or I can look at frameworks. Frameworks are learning objective infrastructures that you can use in order to align your course and your question to the infrastructure. And that's good for analytics where you can actually identify, did they actually handle all the learning objectives for your specific course? What I want to be able to do is just go to search questions. Okay. And it has the search infrastructure. The top part right here is the protocols in order to be able to search it. And the bottom part are the results associated with here. We're going to be augmenting this a little bit in part using some AI to help facilitate that. But right now, you can assign different things that you want on here in order to be able to do that. So for example, if I want to look at only questions by Christina Moon, who I think is here, I can update the results, and 3,165 questions have Christina Moon as one of the authors. And here they never, and you see question number 1. The very first question in our database is Christina Moon, and Christina is going to be talking about discuss it, a more advanced question type, after me in 45 minutes. And like I said, she may actually be here. And I can click and see what it is, and there it is. So that's the H5P question type off of here. I can then go and look at other questions and scroll down off of here. What I want you to do is 2 things. I want you to go to the search option, again, under dashboard. I want you to do a search on some topic, some title, some tag, some instructor. I want you to pull up something. So in my case, let's say I pulled up Larson. Um, and I have 586, so I'm not nearly as powerful as Christina here, but fine enough. Um, and what I want you to do is after you're doing the search, I want you to click on one of these buttons, these copy buttons next to the adapt ID number. So it saves it in your clipboard on your browser. So do that right now. I want you to find a number and you're ready to rock. Give me a thumbs up when you've actually done that. Kevin asked, is there a way to batch process such as clone all questions from a specific OER titles question bank? Um, no. Uh, the we don't do that, and I probably would be hesitant in order to do that because every time that we build up something like that, we did something like that with the textbooks for cloning. We call them copy forking, and whenever we did that, people said, "Oh, I'm going to be editing every page across the board." Really, it turned out that they were only editing 2% of the pages, and the rest were not. So the idea is when you need to edit it, then you fork it because it's right there ready for you to do. So there's no reason for you to be able to fork it before you need to edit it. So we want to lay that off of there. So Abby asks, is H5P the only interactive tool for questions? When you say interactive, you mean sort of more widgety things. Uh, it, uh, all the technologies have some types of capabilities for doing something more advanced. Uh, H5P is the easiest for doing it because it has a very simplified approach in order to be able to build the questions. But for example, if anyone has ever heard of GeoGebra, you can embed GeoGebra interactives into any of the questions that, sorry, into WebWork and iMath AS. And that's a more interactive situation. Since we're on that topic, I might as well show you some of the interactives or some of the things that we can actually do off here. Um, so let's take a look at this. So here are some questions, some capabilities that ADAPT does. So many of the questions we looked at are sort of numerical and doesn't give the impression that there's more advanced things that are involved in it, but there's lots of really advanced things that we have capabilities of. So this right here is our virtual dissection. So any three-dimensional model you can actually put into your infrastructure in order to be able to ask questions like, what's the name of the bone? I can then dissect this thing and cut it up into a much more interactive infrastructure off here. So anything that requires spatial aspects, you can actually fold it into here, whether it's art or crystal structures, anatomy, um, architecture, lots of things. Whereas the spatial aspects are particularly important. Have enabled that capabilities off of here with a handful of other types of questions. This right here is just the numerical value, which is not overly impressive, which I think maybe what prompted Abby's discussion. This right here is an interactive that's associated with iMath AS. Uh, or what's my open math? This right here is GeoGebra that's embedded into the question. This right here is a related rates problem that you can come in order to be able to track that. This right here is an example of H5P where it's drag and drop. You may recognize that a lot of what I just showed you has accessibility issues, and that's true. And that's where the alternative, if you want to use these things, is necessary to, sorry, when you want to use these things, you want to make sure that you have an alternative true false questions in order to be able to facilitate it for students that do need this level of support. This right here is iMath AS for putting in numbers. This right here is our organic chemistry sketcher. So it's draw N-butane. So that would be N-butane that I would then submit, and it would be able to evaluate that, although it's formative. So I'm not sure why it's not going. This right here is a proof of principle that we haven't wired up. So you have the ability of having an interactive spreadsheet. uh, and then have interactive plots that are connected to that. We were going to be using this thing for submitting data for chemistry labs of sorts, but probably we'll just be relying on something else rather than a spreadsheet exactly for being able to do that. We will see. Um, so right here is another example of using three-dimensional modeling off of here. This takes a moment because you're loading up a big model in order to be able to process this. This percentage loading is not necessarily right. So this right here is, instead of using an image, using something that's actually particularly important for people, or not, it's more icing on the cake. I'm not entirely sure why it's, there we go. Um, so in asking a question about the Rosetta Stone, you can actually give them the Rosetta Stone in order to be able to get that. Um, uh, this right here is the new accounting infrastructure. I know that's not necessarily technically active. Let me take a quick look. Rosetta Stone, skull, multiple choice, formative assessment, butane, mark atoms, identify orbitals. So that's a general overview of the sort of things off of here. I'll mention anything that you have that's an interactive, you can put into the platform and build a question around it. For example, if anyone is familiar with FET, uh, so FET is just one example of making little mini simulations. Uh, and these mini simulations, you can then embed into a question type, and then have questions around it. Uh, for example, something like this, and you can have them, uh, you know, do something and ask questions associated with it. So it's a little bit more Socratic. You can potentially even fold it into guided inquiry in order to be able to make it work. You can do this very easily with an infrastructure we call Frankensteining. So, anyways, so if you see interactives that are particularly important for what you're doing, you can make it into a question. And you can do it without a lot of complexity when it's what's called Frankenstein, because you're compartmentalizing the simulation separate from the actual question infrastructure. So you don't need to know about Perl or H5P or any of that stuff like that. They're just completely separate blocks. Okay, so I'm going to assume that most people here have copied one of the codes for one of the questions that are there. I'm going to give another thing to do while I go through the chat off here. So what I want you to do is to go to, so I copied one. I'm just going to copy that number there. I'm going to go back to my course. I'm going to go back to my assignment, and I want to add that question to the assignment. I'd like you to do that right now. So add that question that you found via searching, but you could have also found it from browsing if you looked at someone else's course. While you're doing that, I'll jump through the chat here. Okay. Uh, Denise asked, "Is art could art history be added as a subject?" Yes, we can do that. Okay. Abby's asking for lab style assignments. How would I search for those? What would be the tag? The question I would have is, what type of lab assignments are you looking for? Because there's something that we're particularly interested in order to be able to implement. In fact, I was just writing one of my programmers a couple hours ago about that is a little bit more advanced than what we're presenting here. So the approach that we have here is, typically you have all these assignments in a course, or sorry, you have all these questions in an assignment, and each question is independent of every other question. So the students can start in the middle of their assignments if they want to do. But if you want to do a lab report, you want the students in the very beginning to upload their data, and then do an analysis on the data, and then do another analysis on the data, another analysis on the data, and you want to be able to evaluate whether they did their analysis right. So, and this could be the same thing if it happens to be a statistics lab instead of a science lab. Um, in my case, a chemistry lab. That requires communication between one question and another question. Uh, and there are ways to go about doing it, but I'm not overly happy with that. So I'm working on a different way in order to be able to cross reference that and get that out by the end of summer. because I'm particularly interested in order to build that for my chemistry classes that are out there, so they can actually use adapt instead of using a commercial lab reporting infrastructure and such. And then a company that has the lab report, which we use the Forge in order to be able to facilitate that. So they have data analysis on one side, they have reporting on the other side, and I wanted to do both of them in order to be able to evaluate it and do it in an automated manner so that it's effective and efficient in order to be able to do. Hopefully that's what you're talking about, Abby. If not, then I'm happy in order to talk more about that. Neil said for math is there's a large selection of questions in IMAth. Okay, yes. Um, then there was a link that Tara put in there to art history. That's to the textbooks. I think the question that Denise was asking about was for on here. How do I do a search for questions associated with the book Active Calculus? Um, that right there, if the book is in, I think we brought in active calculus questions. If not, we should bring it in. You do a search and you should be able to select we don't have a selection for the specific book that they're used in, but we can do that. You can actually then select. We don't have that. We will. Um, give me 2 weeks. Um, okay, Sabina asked, interest in computer science, computer. Okay, so that goes into a little bit of what I talked about a few hours ago in terms of Jupyter. Uh, so the Jupyter infrastructure, which you have access to, provides an interface that you can actually pop code in, or you can write code in, or you can have students write code in, and and run things. Typically Python, R, C++, Octave. I think there's Java in there if that's what you teach too. What it There are capabilities in Jupyter called NB Grader that has the ability in order to run tests on the code in order to evaluate whether the code is good. It's basically doing a whole lot of edge case codes and things like that. And it comes back with a report that says these 20 different tests shows that this algorithm is that the student wrote, or this code that the student wrote, is good. What we haven't done is to connect Jupyter into Adapt to pass that into it and then push it through. But that's what we have written into a grant that we wrote, or a proposal we wrote a couple weeks ago, submitted a couple weeks ago, and we expect to be able to have that in place by the end of the year. And I could talk more about that if you like, but that right there is, I think, one of the best things that we can do that's out there. Plus, alternatives that are out there for doing similar things are horrifically pricey. Okay, Denise gives some feedback. Um, are there interactives for computers? Sabino, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. One thing that we were working on uh, is in computer information systems, three-dimensional um, model up like this. This right here is just an orbital, but you can have that as a computer that you can rip apart the different components of the computer, and you can ask questions like, where's the memory go? What's this thing like that? And a few other things like that. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking about when you say for computers, or if you're talking about something else. Um, Francis mentioned a different, you know, the best different people have different workflows that they prefer in order to be able to do these things. That's good. Um, so, uh, and then lastly, Abby asked, it's for math for element or comment. It's math for elementary school teachers, virtual manipulatives. Let's talk about that not offline, but off of this specific presentation. I'm happy in order to discuss it in more detail. Okay, so I presume everyone has added questions to your specific course. Um, if you want to add in uh, something like active calculus, let me see if I actually have that. I don't have that, even though it's been on my radar for a while. I can bring in, if you want to do a search through a specific question bank, you can go about doing that. We don't have question banks. We have courses. Courses act as question banks. That's the way that we actually put this together. It's possible for you to create questions that are not connected to question banks. Sorry, not connected to courses. Um, and that right there, you'll be storing in your own private library, because every question has to be stored somewhere. Anyways, so just as a reiteration, the last hour we were able to create courses and assignments. Now you're able to find courses. Let me chill. You're able to find questions and add questions to assignments. Now, so you did that via browsing. You can also do that via searching. In this case here, you can do a search like through only uh, my courses, or all questions, or only the commons courses, or only the public courses, um, uh, or my favorites. You may have noticed at some point that there's a little heart. Um, oh, here, there's a little heart up here, typically when you look at questions, and that's a way in order to favoritize. It's basically following how Twitter does it, which I'm not going to call it X. That lets you bookmark it, so it saves it in your my favorites area. So if you're going through questions and you just like, okay, let's say you're looking through active calculus and you're like, okay, I like this, I like this. You can just click the buttons and say, I like this, and then recreate a set of favorites that you can then go back to and add off of there. So okay. Um, so at this point here, I want you to add a question, not via the direct import, but by the question bank. Do the same search that we did before. um, so if I'm doing a search on aerospace, and you'll notice only 3 questions that have aerospace off of here, that this right here is slightly different than the search question up here, because it has this plus mark here. This plus mark basically adds it directly to your assignment. So you're basically doing a search that's connected to your assignment. So if you click on this says I've now added 3 questions to my assignment, or I can remove them by, what's this say? Yeah. It's basically saying that if I remove them, then I'm reminded that any submissions for them will also be removed. So I want you to also add a question via the question bank mode. So again, to reiterate, add questions, and then select search questions, do a search protocol for whatever you like, find that question and just click the mark right here. And that way you're not even touching the adapt ID number. Personally, I prefer to manipulate it with the adapt ID number, but I can understand people may want to actually use the search capabilities in order to be able to do it. So once you've done that, please hit a thumbs up, and then we're happy in order to move on to the next thing. Dimensional analysis problems. Actually, we do have some. I need to go search them out. Dimensional analysis can be done in a variety of different ways. And some of them are actually nice and some are not so nice. Send me an email so we can actually take a closer look at that. For nurses dose escalation, we do have the next Lex question types, and a range of other questions that are connected to that. I could try nursing as a metadata. Um, so many of them are from Chippewa Valley, uh, and I think some of them have been do include dosing that's on here. The one thing that I'll mention is that this search is somewhat remedial in the sense that you're adding metadata and filters associated with it, but you're not actually doing searches through the content of the question. One of the things that we're going to be advancing very soon with an adapt is the ability in order to do a search through the question itself and then be able to extract it out, basically folding it in what's called a vector database that you're able to then pull out the questions in an effective manner. And that's part of actually this Ask Benny AI infrastructure that I talked about briefly off here. So is it fair enough to say that most of you guys have done that? Good. Okay. So that's most of the tools. Most of what you need are those three things: making or importing courses, making or importing assignments, or adding questions to assignments, or deleting questions from assignments. The harder part is making a question. And that right there is something that takes a little bit of effort. But I could talk about some of the simpler things that are associated with making a question in order to be able to round these things out. So let's go through that, because many of you are probably itching in order to be able to bring your own questions to bear. And before doing that, I will mention that if you have a question bank already, for example, in your LMS, and you want to donate it or make it easier for you to use Adapt with those questions, that just submit a harvesting request um, at https harvest.libretext.org, and basically we can go through the effort of bringing it out of your LMS or other platform and putting it into this platform in order to be able to use it. That's convenient not just for you, but it's convenient for everybody else that can benefit from it. Because I think a lot of us are sitting on question banks on our LMSs that no one knows about, and then when you retire, no one will ever know about. And that right there is really at least that should be openly licensed, or that you may want it to be openly licensed. And we're very excited in order to be able to do that. So um, let's talk about making questions again. So I mentioned this before. Um, so let's go about doing so. um, I'm going to make a question in C2. I'm going to make it inside a course. I don't have to do that. I can make it outside of a course. And that's this new question button. So I'm going to click on the new question buttons, and it has, again, these 7 options connected to it. The first is blank or mostly blank, because it's a new question. Now, I can clone an existing question and start to modify it, just like I did with importing a course and importing an assignment. But in this case here, I want to do it from a new question standpoint. So we actually can cut through some of the stuff that sometimes gets in the way of stuff. So I want to make a title for my question. So I'm going to call it "My Best Question Ever." Number 2, number 1, or whatever. Description, I don't need to write anything down. It doesn't have an asterisk, but I'm going to do that anyways. It's a question. Exposition is used in learning trees, which I will talk about momentarily, but I'm not going to be talking about building it. I'm going to make this not public because this is a junk question. I'm going to try to delete this afterwards. I need to put that question somewhere. Now, this question is owned by me, so it's stored in my library, or what's called my question area under the dashboard. If I were to have access to it, the modal takes off of it. So I need to select where I want it to be. I have folders in my library. In fact, I have a lot of folders. So I can come in and make a new folder up. Like this is where I've been making 3Ds or junk or chemical engineering questions. So I'm just going to store it in junk. It has to be stored somewhere. This is my authorship. If I'm making this for someone else, then I'd write down this authorship. This is meant for attribution purposes. I still own the question because I'm building it. This is just the attribution of the person who created the question, and they may not be the same thing. Many times they're not. I need to select a license. I cannot not select a license. So I'm going to make this CC by NC. We'll be talking about licenses a little bit later on, although many of you, if not most of you, have some familiarity with Creative Commons licensing, and we have some cool tools in order to be able to handle that I'll be talking about in a couple hours. License number, most of the time, the most updated one is 4. License source, this is technically necessary from us. I'm just giving it adapt as the default off of here. Meta tags, it's good to meta tag. If you don't do meta tagging, we're going to use AI to meta tag, because the vast majority of questions have no meta tagging. We want to be able to improve discoverability of our questions, because we have 1/3 questions off of there. It's going to get much bigger soon, and it's going to be hard in order to cut through. If I have a framework, for example, I have a framework for, um, did I say general chemistry right there. And then I could say this right here is an aqueous reactions component in general chemistry. So it gives me some context about where the level is that's connected. It's not necessary. In many cases, we may not have a framework to work off of, but we recommend that you do that. I can save it if I want, uh, but it's not going to accept it because I haven't done anything at the primary content level, the actual question itself. I just did all the metadata. So this case here, this looks a little strange. It has 3 blocks. Block 1 is an HTML block. Block 2 is actually just metadata, but it's something so important that we put it here. And block 3 is auto-graded tech. When this is rendered to the student, they will see everything in this block and this block together. And I can always preview what I want right here. So for example, if I want to say this is a question that I love dearly, and I want to make an image, I could put an image on here because it's just basically a rich HTML interface. That right there by itself is not an auto-graded question. That's just text. Okay? I could then put this other thing as an auto-graded question down below. I'm going to do that, and I have an option of what type of technology I want to do. Native, H5P, Forge, iMath AS, or WebWork. I mentioned all these terms before. If you didn't get them down already, that's understandable. Uh, each one has a specific focus. Each one has a specific scope. Each one has a specific deficiency. And you pick the one that's important for you. When it comes to just normal garden variety, multiple choice, or true false questions, or things like that, you can choose native H5P, iMath AS, and WebWork. They will all do it. But I'm going to choose native right here because it's the easiest thing to do. In that case there, it does not want me to have an H5P block because it has its own block inside. The other ones will have that there. So I'm going to reselect that. And now I have a set of questions. These are the basic question type. But if I want, I can go through the next generation nursing questions. These were created in collaboration with the Open RN team in Chippewa Valley Community Technical School in Wisconsin. This is if I want to do a sketcher, which is that organic chemistry molecule. So I can choose 2 types of questions. If I want to do a 3D model, right now there's only 1 question type. There will be 3 question types, hopefully in a week. Discuss it. That's what Christina Moon's going to be talking about, which is a threaded discussion line. Accounting, which is a certain set of questions that have been really honed for accounting purposes, or if I want to see all of them, I can do that. We don't show all of them because it could be a little daunting to people. I'm just going to do basic. I'm going to do multiple choice. Okay. At that point, I have the framework for multiple choice put in place. So I have a prompt. So this is my question. I can decide what the choices are. It has 2 default choices. So I can add 4, and I can say 1, 2, 3, 4. And I can select the one that's correct. Multiple choice has only 1. If I want to have multiple ones that are correct, that they all have to be together, then that's multiple select. I can decide if I want this to be randomized. By default, we randomize them, but in this case, we didn't know. There's also some feedback stuff that I don't want to go into. And then I can preview. And this is what my question looks like. It's not a terribly impressive question, but it's a question. And I can then, the point in which I save that question, it then gets a question ID number, and I can embed it into any question that I want. So what I want you guys to do is to create a question in this way, and not worry about these other 4 things because this is just the core question that you need. The core part of the question is the metadata and the primary content, and the other ones are important for stronger, better questions. So just as a rehash, click on new questions here, fill out this information. All you need to do is to fill out the stuff that's asterisked. Feel free to write whatever else. Go to primary content, select native, select true false, which is already automatically, and then write something down. If you want to get extravagant, feel free to select one of the other ones in order to be able to see how they work. Um, there will be a contact insight button up here in about a week for each of these questions that then goes to the insight description that shows the rendered questions and how you actually build them. But we're still fleshing them out and we haven't put them into our site here, but they will be here very soon. So you guys hopefully understand your task at hand. Put a thumbs up if you're ready to rock, and then just put another thumbs up if you've actually done it. And I can't tell the difference if you're rocking or not. Give me a smile if you actually done it, and then I'll know. Got one person who's done it. So building questions like this, building what's called QTI questions, is really, really easy. It's one of the reasons why this is the core question capabilities in the LMSs, because it's just like this is the default. Everyone has it, everyone does it. Are they great questions? Um, they serve a need. They're not nearly as sophisticated as the other ones I showed you, but they fill a need. I mentioned AI a few times before. Several months ago, we started up our AI initiative, which was meant in order to address a handful of different things. One of them is for auto graded capabilities. So Neil Voss is on here, and he's been working a bit in terms of uh, building the infrastructure around auto grading, AI facilitated auto grading of what's called web work, the web work questions, which is a bit more complicated because you're basically asking it to build code, vibe coding, basically, that you want it to be as reliable as possible. And there's a lot of effort off there. But one of the other things that I'll mention, and I just saw the prototype last night, is the ability in order to take a book, go through the book, chew it up, and out comes questions. Uh, and then we want humans to be in the loop in order to review those questions, in order to be able to quickly populate the questions associated with a specific um, book that's out there. And my goal off of here is to make it so that no book is in our platform that doesn't have set of questions that's associated with it. I'm not going to guarantee how comprehensive those questions are, how big the questions are, but at least something in order to be able to move forward, in order to be able to advance that. Getting back to the argument that I mentioned a few hours ago, that we want to be able to provide not just textbooks, but textbooks, homework, ancillary materials, all in an integrated fashion off of here, and having a little bit here and a little bit there is not good enough. And we want to be good enough. So, anyways, um, anyone has is everyone cool with this? I just okay. So that is how you build a simple question. You can go through more advanced things. Obviously, more advanced questions require different sets of approaches for being able to do them. And if you go to Insight, you'll see a range of different solutions to these questions. And again, the buttons will be up here. If you want to do something more advanced, um, like discuss it, that's what Christina Moon is going to be talking about in about 15 minutes, including 3D modeling and how you actually render that. Uh, if you want to go into AIP or iMath AS or web work, they have their own approaches. I'll do web work, and web work actually, like I said, you code things up. So this right here will be a code that runs the web work question, and you need to be comfortable a bit with not just coding, but also with the libraries in order to make sense of this. If this doesn't make any sense to this, you're not going to be using web. Let me phrase that. You're not going to be creating web work questions, or at least if you create web work questions, you're going to create them through the sort of approach that Neil and other people are going to be using in order to be able to facilitate that. H5P, you just make H5P on the studio and you just plug the ID number into here and it's ready to rock. Forge is a different issue. And Forge has to do with being able to have these long form assignments that I mentioned before. And we're going to be expanding that in a week, week and a half to include peer review infrastructure into Forge, sorry, in Adapt, and a handful of other things that we want to be able to address. This is before a big chemistry conference we're going to in a couple weeks. Okay. I can keep on talking. As much as I enjoy listening to myself speak, I can presume that you guys are probably pretty tired of it. So how about I just go through the chat a little bit, and I can answer any questions or something like that, but basically stop me from continuing this process. In reality, I need a whole day in order to go through the adapt to give you all the features that is connected to it. It's that powerful. Um, but we've been building it nonstop the last 6 years. So let me go through these things here. Chris, okay. Yeah, Angela, the harvest link I put down there, then it's really a submission, a normal a submission support.libretix.org goes to it. Harvest should tell you to go to support, so it should be perfectly fine. Okay. Neil likes vibe coding. Okay. Sharbani asks, how do I make true false questions? Oh, how do you make it multiple choice, multiple true false questions? You just basically flip to true false right here, and now you have a true false question, and such. Uh, Andrea has some problems accessing primary content tab. Is it red up here? If it's red up here when you try to save it, it basically says that it's not good in some way, and then you need to find it. Typically, there's going to be a red text down below here that tells you which one of these things is not good. Kevin asks, can I import question banks from Canvas into Adapt or yes, you can import. You can actually do it yourself. Uh, 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 Under my questions, there's a bulk import, and you can select Canvas QTI. You dump a Canvas QTI. It has to be a QTI quiz, the quiz thing, not the whole course, but the QTI thing. And you can then upload it right here, and then it brings it in. So this only works for, I'll call it classic Canvas quizzes. If you use the new quizzing infrastructure, that's not QTI. We did not reverse engineer their infrastructure in order to be able to figure out what that means. We can. It just is not a high priority right now. So what they basically came to the decision that most other people come to also is that QTI is just a little too limiting. And you need to have more advanced features. And as soon as you start to do too many advanced features, it's not QTI anymore. So a lot of the stuff that we do where we have some more advanced things, we can't dump ours out as QTI files into something else because we have tweaked it a little bit, sort of like how the new questions are put in. But if you use Classic, it's all cool. If you have any problems with that, contact me. I can facilitate. We do this all the time. And such. And I have a great desire to go through like Canvas Commons and extract as many openly licensed question banks as possible. And it's part of the greater goal of this grant that we have, because we asked for $2 million to just basically scale up uncontrollably. We're growing already uncontrollably, but when we actually throw lots of gasoline on the fire, it's going to be a big, glorious bonfire. So where everyone benefits. Okay. Neil, so he's commenting about QTI. QTI is probably too flexible, which makes it so every LMS makes their own version. Yeah, so the thing about QTI is it's not like a standardized format. It's it makes it standardized within the system, but across different systems, it's actually quite incompatible. So it's actually QTI. The I is interoperable, or interoperability. Can't remember if it's the full word, but it's really very difficult in order to convert things between one system to another system without reverse engineering and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And we did that with Canvas. We didn't do that with the other platforms. We can. If someone's sitting on a D2L infrastructure and you can't export a Canvas QTI, and sometimes you can, then please talk to us and we can actually go through ways in order to be able to make it work. Francis, if you want someone to have multiple options so any of them could be right, but they don't have to pick them all, what's a option? That's a good question. Um, that's what I was thinking of when I was actually talking about that. I need to see if we have that um, in native. Um, Otherwise, I would have to build it in web work because it's not multiple choice because that requires all of them to be filled. It's multiple. Yeah. Uh, I don't know. I need to be able to take a closer look at that, Francis. If you can email me, I'd appreciate it because then I can actually make sure I follow up on that. If you don't know, my email address is delmar@libretext.org. I posted it right there.